Anshul, can you hear me? Amit, can you hear me? Dr. Amit?
Yes, I can hear you, please.
Okay, wonderful. Anshul, your music has stopped actually, so wondering. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome. Thank you everybody for joining us today for yet another very engrossing session powered by Hero Mind Mind. Hero Mind Mind is part of Hero Enterprise, a very engaging and enticing part of Hero Mind Mind family. And this is one of the India's most premier organization in the space of business and people transformation, learning and development through training and consulting services. It is very well known that employee development is key to long-term sustainable growth in the organization. And as organizations try to survive in the turbulent, dynamic market, strong emphasis must be laid on human capital in order to be competitive and financially solvent. We have today two stalwarts with us, and I'm very pleased to invite Dr. Amit K. Nankolyar and Dr. Aditya Moses, both from IIM Ahmedabad, as they talk about how learning and development impacts organizational performance. Welcome, both of you. Let me begin by introducing both of them for you. Dr. Amit K. Nankolyar is an associate professor of organizational behavior at IIM Ahmedabad. Before joining IIM Ahmedabad, Amit has worked with Indian School of Business for a decade. He holds a PhD in organizational behavior and human resources from the University of Iowa, USA, and an MBA from NTU Singapore. Amit's work has been published in top-tier management journals like Journal of Applied Psychology, Personal Psychology, and Harvard Business Review. His research on cross-cultural negotiations published in the Journal of Applied Psychology has won an outstanding published journal award by International Association for Conflict Management in 2013 for significant and lasting contributions to the field over the period of 2 years. Amit has run training programs primarily on negotiations, leadership development, and team building for various organizations, including Microsoft, IFS officers, RBI, SBI, Lupin, and South Central Railways. Dr. Aditya Moses, PhD, is an assistant professor in human resource management at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He completed his PhD from Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, in organizational behavior and human resource development with a minor in strategy. Prior to his doctorate, he headed the HR function for a chain of hospitals in Maharashtra and Gujarat. He has also completed his master's in international Human Resource Management from University of Portsmouth, UK, and his BE in Electronics and Telecommunications from University of Mumbai. His research and teachings are focused on the impact of technology on human resource management, managing knowledge and knowledge workers, and people analytics. His work has been published in international journals such as Journal of Business Research. He has also published articles in outlets such as BW People. And now I invite Dr. Amit to please start his discourse. Thank you, Dr. Amit. The floor is for you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. It's absolutely wonderful to be here. Thank you to everybody in the Hero Mind family. And we hope over the next 60 minutes or so, this comes across as something which is useful for all of us, as we take this, as we discuss our findings with the esteemed guests out here. So, let me start. I'll just put up my slides for everyone's share. I hope the slides are visible.
Yes, these are visible.
Thank you. So as Mr. Singh was saying, this is a knowledge economy, honestly. And this, we have to think about which are the top big companies, the most valuable companies. Think about Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Amazon. It's all about knowledge. And we're talking about knowledge, then employees are the key. I mean, so essentially we started looking at what is driving organizational performance. I mean, we understand knowledge is important. How much does it matter? And do we understand a process as to how it impacts our sales, our profits? So in terms of agenda for the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to cover a couple of things here. Broadly, we want to talk about employee development. We understand these are challenging times and employee development has changed, but employees are key in a knowledge economy. That's the reason why new products are launched, new services are launched, and a firm can have any sustainable competitive advantage. Now, the problem, or I'll say a dilemma, is when we think about these employee development, we think of it in terms of benefits and cost. The benefits are obvious, or at least it looks obvious. They're going to work for the firm. You're going to work and update your knowledge. We do what is required at task. But what if people who are trained, they leave company in the external market? So we have to be mindful of these two things: the choice that some employees have to leave the company versus as a company you're trying to engage in development. That's number one. The second idea is about the learning and development itself. I mean, we have different definitions, and I'm not going to get into definition, but essentially we're talking about learning and developments are like sources of knowledge in an organization. And that's the metaphor I'm going to use. I'll continue using that. So if L&D initiatives are helping build knowledge, and improve employees' knowledge base, what does it mean? And we talk about three related issues. What is knowledge as an organization? And this applies across sectors. It doesn't matter if it's a private sector, a public sector, or MNC. We are talking about acquiring knowledge from outside most of the times. Then we transfer it. We assimilate it inside the organization in terms of dissemination, which can happen by any means. It could be face-to-face, it could be in classroom, and sometimes the knowledge is simply depreciates. It's no longer relevant, or people forget, or people who are holder of the knowledge, they leave. So that's the second point we want to talk about. The third thing is we are getting into the data which supports what we found, and we'll get into a little bit of analytics because for us, unless we get into analytics, we are not simply sure of what we are talking about. So we'll talk about methods and results, and my colleague Aditya will take you all in terms of what we did, how we came to the results and findings, and certain recommendations as to, given what we learned, what do we do about it? And I understand, I hope this will spark some discussion, some question answers. So if you have any question answer, please type in the Q&A box, and we'll take it over towards the last 15 minutes or so today. So that's the broad point in terms of agenda. Now, we like to just do a dipstick, like we like to have a poll in terms of the audience. We understand, you're all joining in from different places. And can we have a poll up, please? The first poll. We want you to have, please select one of the options. Do you believe LND initiatives help mitigate employee attrition? This is one of the core key point we want to talk about today. So we'd like to hear what you guys think about it, and then we take it from there. So please take a few moments to just select one of the options, and then we'll share the results with everyone out here. Thank you. Excellent. So we see 94% of you, we strongly believe LND initiatives can help mitigate employee attrition. And so that's a perfect entry for us to talk about what we want to say. So we have some very strong health assumptions. And one of them is LND Matters, which now. So in fact, we all believe in it, that organization invest. But now the question is, and I'll try to just put a spanner in the works, is yes, LND matters. Yes, people develop new knowledge, but it takes time for the knowledge to get assimilated. So there are two issues here. One, there is a time element, and that's why we struggle with something called return on investment in terms of LND investment. That's number one. And number two, once employees are knowledgeable, they're up to date, they learn new knowledge, they may seek better pastures. I mean, this is hard to stop anybody because within the labor market, their acceptance goes up. So the dilemma really becomes, and that employees will leave or might leave because they are up to date in knowledge. And on the other hand, as an organization, we can't stop L&D. So the question really becomes, should we keep allocating L&D irrespective of times? And we've just gone through a very, very tough time in terms of pandemic last year. And how do we make sure what we are allocating in L&D is paying off in terms of our sales and profits, going forward? So please keep your questions coming. We'll like to, in terms of logistics, we like to handle towards the end. We believe some of the questions might get answered as we go forward. And whatever is not, we'll be happy to take it towards the end. So please keep them coming. So that's the second idea. Now, sometimes it helps I used to have a real work at one point of time, and not that we don't have a real work. But as an academic, we like to look at data. We like to look at some explanation as to how do we explain phenomena. So we are struggling with this L&D. We are struggling with this payoff in it. And here is one metaphor which I've, not our work, but some metaphor. Think about it this way. We think about the water in a container. And in the similar metaphor, we can think of knowledge in an organization. So organizations, the one difference with that metaphor is the knowledge level in an organization is not constant. It goes ups and down. It's like ebbs, like a river, literally. But organizations do acquire knowledge. And knowledge acquisitions happens when we pour something, when we get something from outside, or we ask the internal our existing employees to get trained. Take something on your own initiative, learn what is happening. And then it's not enough. It has to be transferred. That builds in redundancies, that makes sure that everybody else understands what's going on. So other people understand as well what's happening. So then there is an internal training, there are mentorship, we mimic, we send information, we send communication tools to transfer the knowledge so that everybody in the organization who needs to know understand what we have learned. And finally, just like a leaky tap, some of the knowledge depreciates. It is either no longer valid. Think of technology changes. That's number one. So for example, we used to have fax machines. I'm sure some of you might remember. We used to have pagers as well, and telex operators. The modes of communication has changed. So even though we had technology, it has frittered away, it no longer valid. That's one. Sometimes people who carry that knowledge, they move. So, and they carry that knowledge along with themselves. So wherever they go. So in nutshell, if you have to understand the impact of L&D, we have to have this idea that knowledge is acquired, is transferred, and some part of it depreciates. Some of it's just normal, some of it's not in control, some part we can control. So pretty much this framework, this will help us understand what is going on. So before we go into the next one, can we have a next poll, please? Because that's very important too. So first one, we understand L&D can mitigate attrition. Can we have the next poll? Please take a moment to respond to it. Okay, we have about 50-50 split. That's still extremely encouraging. So some of you are measuring impact on business outcomes, some are not. What we like to say is we'll strongly recommend that please go ahead and start measuring some of it impact. It makes both cases. One, it makes your life, all of our life easier because we can see a result, and we also know what is working and what's not working. So that's exactly what we wanted to see in our data set. So here's a framework for those of you. I put some we put some nice figures and pictures here. Essentially, we're talking about three questions. One, the first thing what we know from both practitioner experience and academic knowledge, that L&D seems to have a positive impact. I mean, in terms of organizational performance. So if you look at the lower left bottom, the learning development can be either in knowledge acquisition and also knowledge transfer. So we're trying to dissect L&D into slightly nuanced approaches. That's one. And this can impact your revenues or impact profit. That's number one. Number two, employee attrition, as we know, has typically considered to have a negative impact on organizational performance. So that's question number two. And third question, can L&D initiatives mitigate some of the negative impact of attrition? So for our purpose, we have actually looked at attrition across levels. So is it senior management, middle management, or junior management? So we could tease apart which of these attritions are more damaging versus others in which we can live with it. That's one. Second, even in learning and development, we're trying to dissect into knowledge acquisition and transfer. So knowledge decay or depreciation, we're measuring as attrition. That's the overall study framework. Now, so these three research questions, what we talked about, learning and development performance, attrition, impacts on performance, and L&D mitigating the relationship between attrition and performance, you have to test it out. It's almost like going to a lab and test it out. Thankfully, because I know we've been involved with BMW Awards for last couple of years. We understood that the BMW Awards are actually celebrating the best of the best in terms of learning and development practice. The assumption itself is business excellence through L&D. So what better way than to check it out in terms of tests or assumptions? What are the best practices? How does it impact the outcomes in terms of business excellence? The other good thing about BMW Awards, we just celebrated 15 years, as many of you know, of this awards, is it's extremely representative. And we have had submissions from some of the best companies you can think about, whether public sector, private sectors, multinationals, even startups. So you talk about NTPC, Indian Oil, the banks like State Bank of India, SDFC, or a Taj Hotel or Siemens, almost every company you can think of, the big ones, and they have shared some of the best L&D practices. So we thought, let's look at what does the evidence suggest. What is really going on, and the reason we personally, both Aditya and I, we believe in evidence is some of the best ideas, what are widely prevalent in business, magazines or wherever you look at it. Think about core competence. Think about bottom-up pyramid, a blue ocean strategy, or closer in terms of hiring, like how do we hire in terms of intelligence or personality testing, or evaluating L&D initiatives like Kirkpatrick's evaluation model. They were all published first in academic journals. So they were rigorously tested. That applies to a wide variety of organizations, and they are practical, because once we know there are documentation, there is certain evidence behind it, we tend to have a little more confidence that we can do something about it. It's no longer that a secret sauce that's only known to a select group of people. We can all learn from each other by sharing some of our best practices. So that's that's the broad agenda. I'll turn it over to my colleague Aditya, who will take it over in terms of what we did in terms of data and analysis, and then we'll move forward. Aditya, over to you, please.
Thank you, Amit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we actually went ahead and did this study. So we started with the applications that were sent between 2015 and 2019. A total of 677 companies applied. Out of this, 407 companies were ones where the data was complete, and so we used them to make our analysis. Now, these companies include leading organizations across all sectors, some of which Amit has already mentioned. For example, we had data on TCS, we had data on NTPC, we had data on Indian Oil, etc., etc. Now, interestingly, most of these applications have both qualitative and quantitative data. The beauty of it is you have multiple years of data and business performance. So how do we actually go about doing it? So what we actually did, Amit, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. So what we actually did was we measured knowledge acquisition as investment in L&D divided by revenue, but that might be impacted by multiple factors. So we actually created a factor called training cost factor, which is the total training budget utilized divided by the total number of employees trained rather than just the number of employees. We also took knowledge transfer as a measure, in which we use training man days, internal training utilization, and employees covered. Now, as Amit had mentioned earlier, we use knowledge decay or knowledge depreciation as attrition. The simple reason was technological obsolescence is very difficult to measure across different industries. So we used attrition and we divided it into senior, middle, and junior level attrition. Organizational performance, though we agree it is not perfect, but for most purposes, for most companies, it is about revenue and profit. So for profits, we used EBITDA. For revenue, we used revenue. Now, the question that arises is, there might be difference because of the size of the company. There might be difference because of the sector of the company. So we control for both these factors. Now, the method that we actually used. So the data is ordered in time intervals. We had multiple years of data, with some companies having 1 year of data. Some companies gave us 9 years of data, but we had a time series data. Now, as a researcher, we believe in evidence. We also believe that correlation can be spurious. I'm very sure you have seen very high correlations of 99.99, but of two things that you know are not related. And we know that correlation does not mean causation, but we wanted to find what kind of cause can be there. So we use what is called a random effects model to understand the impact. We also did one more addition in this. What generally happens is, for example, if you have invested, let's say X in 2020, that X will not show up in performance in 2020. It will show up in performance only in 2021. So what we did was we lagged the variables so that we are able to predict future performance. Now let's get into the meat of the section. What did we actually find? Well, the first thing that we found, which is interesting, is very high LND investment by itself. LND investment without having any focus has a negative impact on that. But training cost factor has a positive impact on that. And that basically means that it is not about how much you are spending, it is how you are spending. Proportion of employees covered in LND initiatives again had a positive impact. Attrition has a negative impact. That is known to us, but it showed up here as well. Interestingly, the largest negative effect was of middle managers. This was followed by senior managers and junior managers. Now, when we talk about the largest effect, I'm talking about the difference between the middle management effect size and the senior management effect size was almost double. It causes a lot more harm when your middle managers leave. So then the question should come, okay, if my middle managers are going to leave or my senior managers are going to leave, how am I going to mitigate the risk? And we looked at only senior management and junior management because that had the highest impact factor. The junior manager impact factor was not very great. So we looked at only these two. But the question is, if knowledge acquisition and knowledge transfer are bringing knowledge within my company, will they also help in mitigating this negative impact due to attrition of senior and middle management? So first we will look at what happens when senior managers. Now there are two graphs that you would see, the one on the left and the one on the right. The left is about LND budget, the right one is on TCF. First, let's focus on the LND budget. So what we did was we categorized attrition, or senior management attrition, as high, average, and low. And we tried to see that your LND budget, investment in LND, and your attrition of senior managers might be two independent events. When these two independent events are happening simultaneously, what happens to revenue? So what we found was, if you have low attrition of senior management, increasing LND budget actually increases or ticks your revenues up. However, if you have high senior management attrition, increasing your LND budget further is actually worse. You're worse off and your revenue falls down. Now, I can't really control 100% for attrition. So I need a solution that will work for any form of attrition. That's where TCF comes in. So high TCF and was able to mitigate the risks that are associated with high senior management attrition. If you see the blue line that is there, you would notice that as TCF increases, which is on the x-axis, as TCF increases, you would notice that the revenue is increasing. Now this works whether you have low attrition, whether you have average attrition, or you have high attrition. Next, we wanted to see, is there anything else that will help? And we found that other things such as training mandates, internal training utilization, the number of employees covered, actually has no significant impact on senior management attrition. Now, there is one problem that is very essential, or one thing that we need to point out. Internal training utilization did not have a significant impact on managing attrition. We saw some more effects. The second effect that we saw was on LND budget on middle management attrition. Amit, can you change the slide, please? So again, we have high middle management attrition, average middle management attrition, and low middle management attrition. Now this relationship seems to be very close to what we saw in the senior management attrition. When you have low middle management attrition, increasing your L&D investment actually helps. However, if you have high middle management attrition, increasing your L&D budget actually reduces the revenues. So it's actually you're worse off by doing this. Now, again, like I mentioned before, we cannot really control for attrition. It's going to happen. Whatever we try to do, attrition is a reality for most HR professions. So how do we control for whatever the attrition level? So what we found was there are two significant things that help during attrition. The first one is TCF, again, training cost factor. Whether you have high attrition, whether you have low attrition, or whether you have average attrition, training cost factor actually improves your revenues in case of middle management attrition. The other thing that really seemed to help, especially when there was high middle management attrition, was increasing the training mandates. So essentially what happens is, if there is high middle management attrition, it has a very large negative impact on your organizational performance. Now, in order to ensure that this doesn't impact me in the long run, that's why we look at the future. What you really need to do is invest in TCF, which is training cost factor, and in training mandates. In the case of senior management attrition, what we saw was if there is high senior management attrition, budget allocation doesn't really help, but budget utilization definitely helps. Now, before we move into the recommendation section, let me take a step back and ask you this question. In the current scenario, we are assuming that a lot of you are using either e-training or e-learning or some form of asynchronous home-based self-paced learning. In which case, have you really measured the impact of what is happening? So can I have the poll question? Okay, so we have, well, about 1/3 people measure impact of e-learning, some people don't. I believe there was an issue with the labels. Let me just go through them real quick before I hand it over back to Amit. So I will explain this. So you would see that there are three different curves. One, or actually let me go back so that it makes more sense. Yeah, so you would see three different curves. One is green in color, one is magenta in color, and one is blue in color. So green is actually implies that middle management attrition is low. Magenta is middle management attrition is high, average, and blue is middle management attrition is high. Now this is just one event or one variable. The other variable that we are looking, which is on the x-axis, is actually L&D budget. So if L&D budget increases, that means it goes from 0 towards the right. What happens to revenue, which is on the y-axis? If you look at the blue line, just the blue line, as L&D budget is low, you have some amount of revenue loss because of attrition. As it increases, as it becomes average and it becomes high, the curve actually is going down, which suggests that revenue actually decreases. Now let's look at the counter or the exact opposite, which is the green, where your middle management attrition is low. When your middle management attrition is low, we start off at almost the same point. However, by increasing your L&D budget, you would see a slight uptick in the green trend line, which essentially means that in case of low attrition, increasing L&D budget positively impacts your revenue. This essentially means that we are mitigating some of the risk that was associated with knowledge depreciation due to middle management attrition. I hope that explains what those three different lines look like, because I believe the labels were not visible. All right. So I will hand it over now to Amit to discuss the recommendations that we have for from us. Amit?
Okay, thank you, Aditya. So what we have said, I mean, if you just look at some of our results here, I hope my screens is shared. You can see my screen. Is like, yes, there is a knowledge depreciation. Yes, attrition tends to lead to lower revenue. By the way, it did not impact profitability. So there are a lot of non-results which were somewhat counterintuitive and a bit surprising. But what we are saying is we need to be strategic. So there's a question about how do we measure L&D? All we looked at is percentage of investment in L&D divided by as a fraction of revenue. So the percentage of that's the L&D budget. So if you look at that, instead of looking at that, what we need to see is we have to be strategic. Strategic in terms of who are you training? Are we talking about junior management? Are we talking about middle level managers? Are we talking about senior level managers? That's first part. The second part is how much are you training? Are you measuring man days, for example, for training the junior managers, middle managers, or senior managers? We know the man days, except for it worked only for middle managers. It did not matter much for senior managers, actually. So there is so sometimes some of our measurement we'll have to think about what are we measuring and how much training we should give and to whom. So that's the second part. The third, how are we delivering the training? Are we trying to get internal trainers? Are we trying to get external trainers? Do you want to have it on more e-learning? Do you want a hybrid model? Do you want an in-class stuff? And I know some of, with the present, even though pandemic will go away, some of things will change. I mean, for once, we are having this meeting on Zoom, while previously there were hardly used to be all these webinars were in person, most of it, So things have changed. So we have to look at three things. Who are you training? How much are we training? And how we are training. These are the three things. Now, what matters is if you're looking at the negative impact, you have to be specifically focused, keep an eye on the middle managers. Those who are well-trained middle managers are very, very important. I mean, at least what the data is telling us that in terms of yes, L&D is helping because that's why they're they're knowledgeable. They're able to do something which is extremely valuable in terms of bringing sales for the companies. So we have to keep an eye on them. The other part is yes, we can mitigate. It's not that there is a turnover can be voluntary because people chose to leave, start their own venture or go their different ways, but some of it is in our hands. So what we're talking about TCF or training cost factor is nothing but if you're utilizing our budget, let's make sure you utilize on the right people, or at least you figure out, if you figure out this much we are utilizing, so just plans are not enough, actually utilization matters, and who do we train matters. So that has a positive impact. The final point is employee coverage. So if it's a more broad-based coverage in terms of initiatives, that's impacting profit. That's actually positive. So instead of just initiatives matter for each level of employees, for almost everything. So the more people you cover, of course the needs will change. It's actually beneficial. So that is pretty much what we are saying. We are not saying cut down L&D. What we are saying is make sure if we have to reduce L&D insights, it should be reallocated. It should be nuanced depending upon the level of management, number one, and two, risk of somebody is probably going to leave or somebody is going to stay on. And I'm sure you guys know something. I mean, you have your measures, or there are ways to figure out who are your flight risks and who are those who are going to stick with you. So, I think I will close at this point of time, because so that we can actually take on questions and answer that might be a little more useful, rather than going on this. So,
Yes. So thank you, Dr. Amit and Dr. Aditya, for this wonderful presentation and this study, that has been done, which is very eye-opening for some of us. So there are, some questions I'm receiving. Maybe I'll just, read out the questions, and Dr. Amit and Dr. Aditya, you can just choose whoever wants to answer this. So one question, which comes is, how do you define very high L&D investment?
Okay.
Can you elaborate a little more? I mean, how can this be defined?
Okay, so there is no fixed measure to say your L&D investment is high or low. For our data set, I can explain. So we had average L&D investment across all companies, across all sectors. What we did was we found the average and then plus minus one standard deviation. Anything above plus minus one standard deviation would be considered, sorry, anything above plus one standard deviation would be considered high. Anything below minus one standard deviation would be considered low. And whatever is in the middle is obviously average. But for a company, you need to look at it in your own perspective, but benchmark it against others, your competitors, I would argue.
So I hope everybody has taken their calculators out with, Dr. Aditya giving a very, we've just once again learned, you will have to really take out our books on standard deviation. So which is fine. I think this is very important. And what he basically is saying, that it is a relative, there can't be any, specific, bar above which can be high and below which can be low. So, but this is very helpful. The other one, coming from Janki Thakkar, she said, how do we measure ROI for any behavioral training?
Return on investment?
That's very right.
Okay. I would argue that your return on investment, if it is being measured at the organizational level, has to be how does your behavioral training impact. Like I said, it's not a complete measure, but it can measure things like revenue, profitability, customer satisfaction, brand value potentially. So depending on the organization, but at the organizational, it has to impact that. However, it cannot be an aggregate of individuals. You can't say A plus B plus C, all my team has done this training and that's why it has impacted. It might be only, so there are certain nuances, but overall at an organizational level, it has to be one of these.
So I think this is good. As a numbers person, as a CFO, I can put my views on this are more towards there is anything your retention tool or attrition. You can just put in numbers and compare it with your training expense, and that is what can give you a good idea about the ROI. So good. I think, then I have another question. Says it has been observed that training budgets are the first ones to be cut in case of a slowdown. What is your thought on that, and what is your advice to these organizations?
So, if I have to say, I'll say, it's more than reduction. Allocation is more important. If we have to reduce, let's reduce, but let's make sure it goes in the right levels on those people who need to be trained. Because for a business to continue, we can't stop complete learning and development, because market, it goes ups in cycles. If there's a downturn, next time there will be upside. And when there's an upside, are you ready to capture on that?
Yes.
That's
yeah. I think that this is wonderful. I was actually reading one of the study on by Bain, and which said very clearly, that people who take some bold decisions and invest, during the slowdown are the ones who reap benefits, later when there is an upturn. And the example, basically that was given was from 2008 slowdown. People who did investment during that period were having CAGR of 18% versus 5% for laggards. So therefore, I think this is not really a very good argument that during slowdown you should slow your or cut your training budgets. I think that will be cutting the wrong end, from your strategy. I think there is another question from Mr. I think this is Padmavati Vedula. So she asks, how can we measure impact of training expenditure in, okay, I think, this is on behavioral, this we have already answered in a way. Okay. How do you define L&D's role in building a learning culture? So this is Anshika Sahu. Is how do you define L&D's role in building a learning culture?
So
yeah.
This might go slightly beyond the purview of this particular paper. So one of the things that I always, one of the courses that I teach is how do you manage knowledge and knowledge workers in an organization. And the truth is that it is important about how do you create a culture. And remember, a culture is about artifacts. Artifacts are processes, people, policies, and structures that you have in place. If they are promoting training or they're promoting knowledge sharing, knowledge transfer, knowledge acquisition, then you are creating a culture where people want to learn. What I mean is all these need to be aligned. From a very research point of view, if we say that three things need to be aligned. One is your vertical alignment, where whatever policies or practices you have in place are aligned to the strategy of the organization. Horizontal alignment, which is basically whatever policies or practices you have are aligned across employees. You're not favoring one group of people over the other. And the third one is action. So all these policies and processes and structures are great, but if you don't put it into action, you're going to lose the essence. Building a culture is dependent on meeting all three criteria. And there are tons of examples, some of them who have applied, who are there in our data set, who have built a learning culture. So it takes time, but it has to be a balance of these three to actually, which promotes knowledge acquisition, sharing, and transfer. That answers the question.
Yes, I think that this was wonderful, Aditya. So there is another question which says, while employee retention is on one side very important and a big issue, there's a contradiction these days, in tech, sort of, coming and in a way making employees redundant or replacing employees, things like RPA, etc. Even AI and ML, used with RPA, etc. Can so there is a fear, at least in the minds of people, of replacing, the people. How do you solve this contradiction?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Amit, maybe.
I'll give you a good example.
Yes, please.
I was giving a seminar for a group of HR teachers or people who teach HR in undergrad schools, and they said, will we be replaced? Or will automation and AI and ML replace HR? And my answer is no. It may replace very administrative tasks that HR people do, but it will definitely not. But that said, attrition to some level is always good. Most of our research suggests, just like inflation, low inflation is also bad and high inflation is also bad. Similarly, low attrition is also bad and high attrition is also bad. However, those people who you have, and if you are ready to lose them, that essentially means that we are losing a lot of what is called tacit knowledge. Knowledge that people are taking with them is knowledge that cannot be written down and documented, which is a problem. That is the knowledge we need to retain. Technological skills like AI and ML, there are tons of places where you can code it, where it is available, where you can reskill your employees. Look, AI and ML is nothing new. It has been done before. It is, at least for us as academics, it's not.
We did some part of it even today, actually, because we are predicting. And so it's a structured machine learning if you want to think about it. But,
yeah.
but
actually, the model is called machine learning to us, it is not. So.
The fear of computers about 20 years ago, when everybody thought computers are coming and everybody will be out of job. I do remember a lot of strikes happening, everywhere in banks and telecom and everything. So my thing is, yes, some jobs will die, and I'll be upfront about it. Some jobs will die. New jobs should come up. There's some kind of ethical part also, because people who are most vulnerable in some ways, and I take that kind of, it's personal biases coming, that certain people who are most vulnerable are, if they don't look it up and understand what is going on, they're most vulnerable. So it's a question of both the government and the industry and everybody coming together so that what is right for the society.
Right.
That's where I'll leave it.
Yeah, I think it's very important. This is more about evolution of society in general. Where old things, old traditions, old systems, old methods will die down, and new method, new things, new inventions, will come, in place. And that is where the need for employee training, learning is that much more important. So therefore, it is also very important that while certain jobs, when the computers, the example that you gave, some people were doing by hand, they died down, but there were a lot more jobs that were created. So similarly with RPAs or AI coming, and some of the jobs will go down for sure. But then you have to move upwards and take that progress that the society is making and evolving, so that you are ready for those new jobs which will be created. So somehow I think this balance will come. So this auto equilibrium, sometimes comes into place in some time. But in the interim period, the transition period, of course, there is a pain which we all have to go through. So there is another question, Mukta Huprikar, and I see a whole lot of questions coming from the fairer sex only, and the guys are not asking questions. Good. But measuring ROI for behavioral training is difficult. Example, how can you measure for the ROI for training on values of the organization? ROI for training on the values of the organization. So this question, how do you measure that?
So the way I would measure it, I'm just giving you an example, but how I would measure it. So the values of an organization, if you look at it from a very broad perspective, come from the shared vision that the organization wants to share with everybody, right? Now, if I buy into the values, I should be engaged. Remember, I'm saying engaged, I'm not saying satisfied. So if I train everybody on values of the organization, they should or should not be more, the engagement levels should change. If my employee engagement is high, it should lead to more productivity, not satisfaction. A satisfied employee may not be engaged. An engaged employee may not be satisfied. So I would go about it in this way, that if I'm talking about values, I'm trying to align people to the values so that they are more engaged. If they are more engaged, it will lead to more productivity. So I would measure it like that.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe, again, being the numbers man, I'll give another, numbers perspective on this, and ROI is a number, for that matter. A couple of days ago, I was just looking at the fraud report, which was published by Grant Thornton. I think this has been done very recently, last week only. And if you look at the number of, fraud that are coming up, and the kind of losses companies are, suffering, is astounding. So does it not make the case for giving training on values, on integrity, and inculcating that again and again and again and again? That is the differential that you have to take when you look at ROI. You training people in integrity, making them understand, bringing them put together and creating those controls, and then comparing with the, again, the fraud that are taking place. So that could be another way of looking at it.
Oh, sure.
Good. So I think there is, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
You are an organization which runs a Ponzi scheme and you want people to do frauds.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So there is one question on impact of individual training versus team training.
So that in our world is called, our world means in academic world is called a multi-level problem, which an expert on that is Amit. So Amit, please.
Yeah. No. I like the way we are trying to play questions around. So yes, what I do, most of my stuff is how any initiative at one level impacts changes. So I might be impacted at, say, at individuals you're training, but your team members also got impacted, because when you go back to your workforce, you start saying, okay, no, we need to do a little bit here and there. So that's one way. What works, what we have to make sure is that training should align with the amount of collaboration. Is the task requires you to collaborate and come together, or is the task is specialized enough so that individual members can do the best job? So if and the reality is most things are now based on team level, but some things are very specialized and individuals are okay. So there could be a huge cost benefit in terms of training a team, because it makes it very easy. And when those people work with other people, because we are all part of multiple teams or committees or project works, we actually go ahead and tell everybody else, you know what, I just learned in some other place that they do things like this. Can we do the same thing here? So that has a much faster reach rather than trying to select individual. That's
So I have another question, which is an interesting one. It says, how authentic are the claims on training impacting profitability? So there's a question mark. Okay, can you please cite specific cases from your experience as jury on training awards? If it is a campaign-based training or specific skill set training, can it be correlated? It can be correlated, but can it be applied to all training programs? So, does training impact profitability? That's precisely the question. Or if you have any specific cases.
So two ways to look at it. One, what we just presented was at aggregate level, training impacts, it matters. I'll just stop there. It matters on aggregate level. And that's one thing we were just trying to say. Now the next part is, will every training lead to something, improvement in profitability or sales? Not necessarily. There could be something which we just want to make sure the customer does not get angry. I mean, we can drive away a customer even at the front end level. For example, I mean, like, you talk to somebody at hotel and you don't like something, it will never be captured. So the question is that some of things are like, what all we can capture, what we can measure, and it depends on what we want to measure also. So these are not out of thin airs. These are actual data. Yes, it matters. Yes, results matter, but we have to know what we are measuring and for what.
Yeah, I would rather, take this question. I'll just put it completely, let's say I flip it and I say, what if you don't train your people and you become obsolete? Where will the profitability go? So continuous training is extremely important. I take a very different example. I was listening to R. Ashwin, the cricketer, and he was talking about, getting training and specific training on his batting. I'm not talking about the bowling, by Vikram Rathod, who's the batting coach of the Indian team. And we all see, last few tests, how his batting has improved. So has that impacted the profitability of the team? Of course, the profitability of the team is the win ratio. And we all know where the win ratio is and what is Ashwin's contribution. And this comes from training. And as you said, Amitji, I think it was very important. It's not the individual, training. It's a collective effort and the collective, aggregate that will absolutely impact the profitability.
Organizations, they're gone dinosaur initially. I mean, like companies like, Kodak. I remember using a Kodak film. Where is Kodak?
Yeah, absolutely.
We used to have Blackberries not too long back.
Yes.
or Nokia, where are they? I mean, if you can only sell what you know to a certain extent, but you have to have, you can exploit your existing one, but if you have to upgrade, do we have a choice? I don't know.
Absolutely right. I think there is another question which comes from anonymous attendee. Okay, anonymous, fine. In your experience as L&D experts and researchers, how have you managed to attract middle and senior managers into leadership programs despite their day-to-day deliverables? Some tips on your pull method rather than the push method to ensure L&D program helps them in their growth. Good. That's day-to-day pressure. We all know. Yeah. So.
Talking about how we attract middle and senior managers to IIM Ahmedabad. I don't know what else to say. We are IIM Ahmedabad, so people come, I guess.
Yes.
But
so that's a good pull. That's a good pull, no doubt about it.
But from my own work experience, I used to have a huge problem trying to pull people from everyday work to come into training programs. And I'm very sure a lot of training managers are in the same shoes I was in about 5-6 years back. And then what I started doing, or what I realized was, it is about numbers for them because they also have targets. So I started talking in their language, and that really helped me. So I would say that, look, if they go through so and so training, and so people have gone through it, this is how their team has improved. This much they have been able to do so and so, and in numbers, that really helped me. Amit, do you want to add?
I mean, I'll say the same. You have to take a slightly longer perspective. People who have done training, maybe they have gotten either better jobs, bigger budget, newer product, newer teams. So you have to pull some people out, and it has to be on a rotational basis. It has to be planned. Some part of it is planned because generally what happens is, if you are very productive, you are not sent for training because it affects your day-to-day. Who does work? I mean, remember long time back, my boss said, man, if you go, who will work? So, I like, that's a big dilemma. So can we go a little beyond that and think, you know what, if we put 3 people, 4 people every month out for training in a rotational basis, overall the work will be there, and you have to plan that transition. I guess that's where I will say.
I'll just add one more point, okay, based on our research. So don't focus, our research very clearly suggests, don't focus on going, and if there are 10 employees, don't go and focus on training on all 10. You need to be strategic about your training. You need to know how much to spend on whom and at what level are these people. So if you are middle managers and you feel that a lot of middle managers are flight risks, and I'm sure you have heard of this flight risk model that you can create. So if you feel that they are flight risk, maybe you need to ensure that first let's retain them and then train. So you need to be we need to be a little more strategic about how we think about training, rather than, it's not whitewash. We are not whitewashing a wall. We are actually drawing a picture, a beautiful painting. And you would use different colors in different parts to create different hues of color. Right? And that's what you need to think of. So training is not whitewashing a wall. It is actually creating a beautiful picture by strategic allocation of colors.
Good, wonderful. I think we have just exceeded the time, and I'm very happy to end this conversation on this wonderful note. So Dr. Amar and Dr. Amit and Dr. Aditya, thank you very much for these wonderful deliberations that we have had over last 1 hour or so, and there is still a whole lot of questions, but I know the questions will keep coming. This is such an interesting topic, interesting subject. But what is very important is that we all understand the importance of employee development and training in the organization. And it is very important, that we all understand that organizations' future lies with people. You have all kinds of resources, but people will finally make the difference. They will make it happen. So it is extremely important for us to retain the long-term sustainability in the organization, that all our employees are trained in the new methods, new ways, and new age competencies which are coming to forth. So that on that note, I would like to thank both of you, and I would also like to thank a very interesting audience that was there, a large number of audiences that were there, and very participating audiences. They were asking a whole lot of questions, and thank you very much. So see you some other time on some other topic. Till then, goodbye.
Thank you so much for having us.
Take care.